Thank you for joining us. I'm Amy Landau, Director of Education and Interpretation at the Fallah Museum. The Fallah at UCLA acknowledges our presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino Tongva peoples. Tonight's conversation accompanies the Fallah exhibition, Amir H. Fallah, The Fallacy of Borders, which is open until May 14th. The exhibition's title is inspired by Amir's engagement with materials and practices across art forms, as well as his collaborations across fields. The Fallacy of Borders spotlights the artist's broad experimental drive, which is anchored in his personal trajectory and his creative paths through publishing, museums, public art, and activism. A recipient of numerous grants and prizes, Amir earned his BFA in Fine Art and Painting at the Maryland Institute College of Art and his MFA in Painting at UCLA. His works are in such museums as LACMA, the De Young Museum in San Francisco, the George M. Perez Collection in Miami, and the Xiao Museum of Contemporary Art in China. Amir was born in Iran in 1979 at the height of the Islamic Revolution, and he and his family moved several times before arriving in the US. Throughout his career, Amir has returned to his Iranian heritage and his experience as an Iranian American. In organizing this exhibition, I've come to know Amir as a deeply humane individual who grapples with moral and ethical issues through his practice. It has been an honor to work with him and to introduce tonight's conversation about CHANT, a newly created large-scale neon artwork to be displayed on the facade of the Shulamit Nazarian Gallery in Hollywood at the intersection of Melrose and La Brea. CHANT was created in partnership with Matt Dilling, a queer art fabricator and the founding partner of Lite Brite Neon Studio. Since 1999, Matt has helped develop and create artworks for public and private institutions worldwide, with a focus on the projects that shine a light on social justice and human rights. Shiva Balaghi is a cultural historian of the Middle East at UC Santa Barbara. Most recently, she has collaborated with Mosaic Philanthropy on 2 public art projects on women, life, freedom, a virtual exhibition, and a projection at San Francisco's Asian Art Museum. I would like to thank support for tonight's program from the Farhang Foundation and from the Center of Near Eastern Studies right here at UCLA. So right now, I'd like to turn the mic over to Shiva and Amir to start. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to begin by thanking you all for joining us, and to Amy Landau, the curator of this wonderful exhibition by Amir Fallah at the Fallah, and to Libby O'Kane, who's done such a great job organizing today's webinar. Thank you everyone at the Fallah for hosting us, and thank you Amir for giving us this wonderful opportunity to talk with you about CHANT.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
CHANT entered my life as an idea that was germinating in your mind. Very early on, like I think October of this year, you reached out to me and were thinking about doing a public art project. You were thinking that maybe it would be neon, and you were doing research on symbols. And so I want you to take us back to that moment where CHANT was just a spark of an idea. What were you thinking? How did you arrive at this particular work?
Well, you know, I think like most Iranians, especially those of us that live outside of Iran, we were all watching the news, looking at social media, and you know, with a lot of anxiety and anger and mostly frustration about what we could do. There's really not many NGOs that you can donate money to. You can go to protests in America, but there's not much you can do. And it's just for me, very frustrating that I can't like actively, you know, help change and bring justice and democracy to Iran. So I started talking to some friends who lived in who lived in Iran, especially young artists, mostly online. And I asked them, how they feel about everything, what they want those of us outside to do. And overwhelmingly, the answer I got was amplify our voices. Don't forget about us. We know you can't come here. We know you can't donate money. You can't force change, but at least take our message and spread it, far and wide. And I also noticed around that same time that in the news for how substantial of an event was taking part in Iran, there wasn't as much coverage as I would have liked to have seen. I mean, in my mind, these recent protests are essentially a revolution of sorts, and also more importantly, it's probably one of the biggest feminist movements ever, where literally the vast majority of an entire country, men, women, people from all different social classes and religions are coming together, and they're standing for basic human rights, for women's rights, and I think that's something really significant. I've never seen it in my lifetime, and so anyway, so I was motivated to make something, and the first thing I was like, how can I use my skills to spread word about this? And so immediately I thought of art, and art is really great because you can use it as a way to get press about certain issues that otherwise wouldn't get coverage. So I thought, all right, well, maybe I can make a work of art that could also amplify the message, but I could also use it as an excuse to reach out to various press contacts that I have, and have them cover these issues surrounding what's happening in Iran, so that it can be, top of mind. So that was really the initial thoughts, and that's when I reached out to you and many other Iranian Americans, Iranians that really around the world, and I said, I started tossing out ideas for what it could take, how this would it be a billboard, a sculpture, a painting, and see how it would take shape.
Yeah, I think from the start, the protesters in Iran were very clear that what they wanted those of us who live outside of Iran to do is to amplify their message. And so you as an artist realized that making art was a way that you could both convey their message, but also maybe get more press coverage of the protests. That's wonderful. So then when you decided that you were going to make a work of art, you started to think about what symbol you could use, because you always use a lot of the objects and symbols in your artwork. They may look like they're decorative and beautiful, but they always have meaning, and you put a lot of research into what they mean, both for individual people, but also the message that they can be, kind of the message that they convey more universally. So how did you arrive at the sun as the central symbol of this work of art?
Well, it was a interesting journey, and like you said, I'm very interested in symbols and iconography, and the power and history that images hold. And so I looked at many different options, and my main goal was I didn't want anything that was divisive in any way. Tensions are running high, and everybody's just very heated and very passionate about their specific beliefs. And I wanted something that felt very universal. So after speaking with you and many other friends, I started thinking about the history of the sun on the Iranian flag, and how for hundreds of years, this image of the sun has appeared in various ways on the flag. And also I like the sun because it was a positive symbol. It's a symbol of energy, of life. And historically, the sun has been on the Iranian flag, on the Iranian flag. But what was interesting to me was that the face on the sun at some point was removed during a Pahlavi regime, and the sun became kind of blank. And I thought that was really interesting because the sun's features have always been feminine. And with the juxtaposition of the line, I thought it was like a really beautiful balance. And I thought, well, I want to bring that symbol back. Like, why does a symbol for women, for femininity, why is it erased? Especially when the sun is what gives everybody life, just like women give everyone life. So it was an opportunity to bring back the symbol that I think had been kind of not forgotten about, but removed off this symbol for Iran.
It's a really appropriate symbol because, you know, in Persian, Khorshid Khanum, you know,
Yes.
Ms. Sunshine is feminine. In a lot of cultures, the sun is feminine. And, you know, and it is the root of life. And obviously sunlight is free. So it really does symbolize woman, life, freedom, which is the main slogan of the protest movement originating from Kurdish women's rights organizations. So I think it works really well. Should we go ahead and bring Matt on?
Sure.
And hi, Matt.
Hey.
Thanks for joining us. So I'm just going to ask you to let us know at what point in this project did Amir reach out to you and say, I think I know what I want this artwork to be. I think I want it to be a neon, and let's work together on it.
Well, Matt and I, we go back all the way to high school. We took art classes together, so we literally grew up together. And you know, at various points in our lives, we've lost touch, but then reconnected through social media. You know, we live on different parts of the country, and so we actually started. The very first time we collaborated was when we were in high school, and Matt wrote an essay for my magazine, Beautiful Decay, and I helped Matt install some art in various museums throughout the DC area. So we were kindred spirits for a long time. So and I knew that Matt had become this incredible neon fabricated an artist in their own right. And I was really looking for an excuse to do something with Matt because it's for me, I like to experiment with different materials, but I also, if you can experiment with a new material and collaborate with someone that you have this very old connection and bond to, like what's better than that? So I had messaged Matt several years ago saying, hey, I got some ideas for neon, but nothing, the timing wasn't right. But for this, since I wanted to make something that would literally grab people's attention, stop them in their tracks, be almost like a beacon, this made the most sense. So actually before the sun image, Matt and I started talking about possibly working together.
So I'm going to let you guys talk a little bit about how you work together, this collaboration, this creative collaboration that took this germ of an idea to a finished product. Show us how you went through the step of collaborating on this together.
Yeah, well, I can start, and then Matt, feel free to chime in. I think I knew that I wanted the neon piece to say woman, life, freedom. And I knew that I wanted it in 3 different ways. So it says it in English, it says it in Farsi, and it also says it phonetically in English, but sounding out Farsi, which is kind of this hybrid language that many Iranians, especially in the diaspora, communicate on social media. And for me, I like that connection of that kind of in between English and Farsi, because that's really where my life resides. I never feel 100% Iranian. I never feel 100% American. Even though I was born in Iran, I've always felt like I was in this kind of cultural limbo. So having this phonetically sounded out Farsi, it feels like the perfect combination of these 2 modes of this mode of communication. So I think we were talking about, you know, and I think Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I always wanted it to kind of go in a circle, and we tried different images.
Hmm.
And at a certain point, my friend Tara Talbasan, who's an incredible artist in her own right, she mentioned Khurshid Khanum, and she was like, what about Khurshid Khanum? And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And then I went down this rabbit hole of the history of the sun and Persian culture, and then things started clicking. And I think at that point I came to Matt and I said, what about a sun? And Matt and their team took this very rough sketch that I made and changed it into something that would work with, the specific linear methods of neon. So Matt, do you want to talk about how you guys kind of changed or edited it, the original sketch?
It's very easy to do because you had arrived at such a great design. And even inherently the nature of what we do in terms of making light and using light as a form of representation to then use light to represent the sun, our most powerful source of light on this planet, was really like you were working with very good material to begin with. And that idea of like working in the circle around that, when we were talking about the location for this and what we were working with, like it really informed the way that the neon could be developed and designed out. And so much of this iconography and the way that neon takes language and brings it back into light, it relates both to how we can communicate and visualize, but also it relates, just to how the eye and how we perceive things. And I feel like the design you came up with when we started working through this was something that really evolved both out of like what you were talking about of that historical framework, but then also like how we worked with it in terms of like the way that the neon could inform, amplify, and illuminate the message that you had there. And some of that on a technical level really just dealt with, what are the scale of the materials we're working with, but also, Amir, like the way you were working with like weaving, the sun's rays between the text, the layering, the speed at which things would alternate, like all of those things really inform, I feel like, the way that the design came together. And I know you and I were talking, like I feel like this was one of those almost like alchemical processes where until it was made, it was hard to necessarily know exactly how it would come out and how that would translate. And once we got it together and lit in the studio, the whole team who worked on it, we were all just, there was an ineffable moment where like we're just like, yep, that's it. It's it came out better than we had hoped. So that part of it, I think, again, really lends it back to like the nature of that design and the nature of the way it represented. And I'm personally really like, I've been thinking about it since you and I talked, Amir, and like that fourth beat where it's just the sun and the language drops away. Like there's something to that. There's something to the universality of that, like the way we relate to light, the way we relate. I think like ultimately like part of what is great both in the process of how we work and in this process in general is there's a moment where language does drop away. And I was thinking about how rare it is in the neon work that we make, because oftentimes we're illuminating and relating to language. Sometimes there's moments where like the language goes dark, but in this case, like, even though there's, these three different iterations of women, life, and freedom, there's this fourth one, which is the sun, which is ultimately like that stage beyond language, like that's that. And that part of the design I've really come back to is like a really potent but poetic step in, in that animation.
Yeah, maybe we can go to some of the images of it in process. If we can go to the next image, just to show some of the technical process. Also, I should mention that the one thing that we played around with several times was the Farsi text. At first, I tried to use some, digital typography, Farsi typography to write "Woman of Life, Freedom" in Farsi. But because of the circular nature of it, I actually hired a designer in the UK, Iranian typographer Sahar Afshar, to draw that text custom, because it was so complicated to get all the three different layers of text to overlap but still be individually legible. So that was an interesting challenge that Matt and their team solved, and we kind of went back and forth, but otherwise it was very smooth. I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to work with Matt again on this is because I know that they're a professional. I've worked with them in the past, and there's a level of trust where if Matt says we should do it this way or we should animate it that way, I just say, okay, no problem. Like, there's no, I don't question it. Matt's the best person working in the neon field as far as I'm concerned. So and has like a very long, incredible resume of collaborations. So when you're working
have
with,
some more slides of
yeah,
this
can we
process
go to the next slide? And Matt, chime in and explain what we're looking at. Libby, can you go to the next?
Again, like sometimes when we're in development, there's a lot that's left mysterious till the end, but there's a lot that's not that gooey, a lot more prickly. So what we were looking at there was a very, just a laid out technical drawing, what's going where. Here you see some of the rays of the sun having been bent out of glass on a table. And then Savannah's there working on painting the aluminum background with that sun design. And this was part of like Amir, where like, it's both always a technical challenge to take an artist's idea and bring it into like the materiality and the limitations we have. But oftentimes there's a lot of poetry that can be found in there. And the way that this like sun came together, the way the components of this came together really like reinforced that part of the process for me in working with you, which was so great. Like, you were super trusting, very open, really allowed us to kind of dive into how to execute that design in a way that was both, a bit technically challenging, all those layers, all the animation, but also like, it's really nice when we're starting with like really good aesthetics, like starting with something like the sun. I was thinking back to what you said earlier about polarizing, and it's sort of a funny term because you have like those polarized glasses that you wear in the winter with the sun, or maybe you guys in LA have to wear them all the time. But I was thinking that the sun is something that's somewhat universally appreciated on a certain level, as like life-giving, as really an element of warmth and an element, I feel like, of a source of compassion. So we were like working with that as the center of your design. And the way we're executing it here, we're actually taking glass, we're taking the design, we're heating it up, we're bending it, we're forming it, and then we're figuring out a way to structurally assemble it. And so many of these things, whether it's this movement towards liberation, human rights, or creative process and artwork, like there's a dance between like the poetic side of it and just the super heavy practical side of it. Like, how is it going to get made? How
we have some more slides. Can we see the next slide? There we go.
So what we're looking at here is pretty, standard for how artwork would go together, but that drawing that's at the base there, that's showing the layout of where everything's fitting. Savannah's placing some glass. She's kind of got her thumb up the nose of the sun right there, but she's actually just aligning that tube in place. because of the layers, like Amir, what you were saying earlier, there's an order in which things had to be assembled here. Things overlap and layer each other. So it's working from like the lowest layer down, which in this case is the metal, and then the drawing, and then the sun, and then we get around to the text. I think if we keep going through the slides, there's a few more. So here, once it all comes together, there's those layers of text on the outside that animate. There's the sun in the center, and then there's rays of the sun that also animate, that overlap with the text there. That's a really good design.
Yeah, actually, one thing that I should add is that I didn't know that you could animate neon in such a way. So I think that really like breathes new life into the piece. And actually, this is the first time I think most people have seen these images. So I think at the end we have an image of it kind of cycling through in Matt's studio. Yeah, there we go. So yeah, the animation for me is really exciting because I usually work with static images with painting or sculpture or stained glass, but it's never kind of changing and morphing. And so my idea was that as people are driving down the street on La Brea, which is one of the busiest streets in LA, that they would see this and they would get curious. Maybe they don't know what woman life freedom is, or maybe it piques their curiosity, and maybe they pull over and we'll have some sort of QR code at the gallery's entrance where they can scan and find out more about what's happening in Iran, and have links to various resources and things of that nature.
I love that idea of having a QR code where people can get more. You know, what I really love about this piece, the more I look at it, is it really does fulfill that original hope that you had when you first reached out to me and we started the process of sending each other, images of different symbols that you could maybe use, because it has a very particular Iranian reading to those of us who are familiar with Iranian pop culture. We know Khorshid Khanum, we recognize the colors of the Iranian flag that you use for the text. But even if you don't know any of that, you can tap into what Matt was talking about the sun being this life-affirming force. And, as the sociologist Asif Bayat has said, women life freedom, this movement really is a women-led protest movement with Iranians wanting to reclaim life, and so the life-affirming quality of the sun and the way you project it in this piece, I think, is a really powerful and beautiful manifestation of the spirit and intent of this protest movement in Iran. Well done, you guys.
Thank you. Somebody was in the chat was asking about the color discrepancy. I think they may be really referencing the printout sketch, and the colors that you see in that sketch are, I think, Matt, you could probably answer this, for technical reasons and not a reflection of the actual colors. But the sun itself in the piece is yellow, and then the text cycles through green, white, and red neon, the three colors of the Iranian flag.
Yeah,
so
just I don't know specifically, but we actually use color on a lot of technical drawings to isolate and reference specific circuitry. So sometimes if you're looking at a drawing, the colors actually are not related. They're related more internally for circuit finding.
So the color-coded sketch was not necessarily referencing the color of the final product, but it's your shorthand way of messaging the technical aspect of making the neon.
But it's interesting too. I mean, we're still looking at this color through, photos, through how Zoom's presenting it. There's that aspect of all of this representation where there's a lot that's concealed and a lot that actually doesn't appear how it really is. And then there will be the environmental factors too, like how you see it in the daylight when you're actually viewing it with sunlight versus when the planet is obscuring the sun and you're seeing it in more atmospheric darkness.
And you're going to have audiences who see this walking on the sidewalk and have a chance to stand and ponder it, and others who are going to see it flashing by when they drive by. Very fascinating. I mean, one of the things when I moved to LA in 2017, Amir was the first LA artist that I met. I met him at a gallery party. I even have a photo on Instagram of the first time we met. But I've watched him I've seen his different exhibitions, I've seen his installations, I've done studio visits with him, and form and content in his art really drive one another. He'll decide he wants to do stained glass and he'll work towards being able to make that. So I think it's really interesting for me to listen to the way you guys are talking about the way you technically kind of interpreted through neon the technical aspect of what he wanted to produce. Do you want to talk a little bit more about your work as a neon artist, Matt, and the technical aspect of making this idea into a real functioning work of art?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I feel like our role is more like a role of a translator, and like a steward of a process. So some of it is pretty technical and specific. Obviously, there's a lot of technical sides to this in terms of how it's produced, how it's made, how it goes together. But Amir, it's exciting to work with you as someone I've known the whole time I've been exposed to and involved with neon and exposed to and involved with public art. And I kind of love the way those things wove back together on this project. But part of what we do at our studio is to really try and like feel into and listen to what an artist is seeking and what are the resources we have available that help execute that. And in this case, like, I think part of what was exciting and engaging with the idea that Amir brought was that there was this desire to work somewhat with the language of signage and the way that neon is pretty show-stopping. The first neon sign to come to America was the Packard dealership in Los Angeles, and it literally stopped traffic when it was put up.
Wow.
So there is this element of using light to awaken, to convey, to like, get a message across. But there's also this element of it that's like super mysterious and just, it's a very humbling medium. All the glass we hand bend, all the wiring, it's quite frankly, it can be kind of a nightmare of a medium to work with. And so it's like, how do you work with that in a way that's both humbling and exciting and engaging? And work like this is really interesting to me because we're working with like many layers of history here. And that part, Amir, like when you came and you're like, this aspect of the sun, the history of it being symbolic and then that symbol being removed, and sort of like that circle of the way that like iconography and representation can appear and disappear has this relationship, I thought, that was really interesting to the sun. The fact that every day the sun rises and the sun sets, these are some of the few things we can somewhat count on regularly as humans. And I think there is that element in terms of like taking this idea, taking a sketch, taking something that an artist is producing, where we can do it in a very, like left brain, very technical orientation, or we can go, to the other extreme and just get really lost in like the visual poetry and the aesthetics of it. So there's this aspect of weaving between them, like the writer Alan Watts sort of talks about prickles and goo, and that we're all gooey prickles and prickly goo. And I think that's part of it, working in this case is like, how do we take what's like really clear? And like, I really love that, Amir, when we were working on the process, like I think actually some of the things we spent a lot of time with was going back and forth about like the sun's rays, you know, and looking at representation of that in different ways, and like, how did that come through? How were you envisioning it? And then once we like were laying out some of that, like, how are we seeing that as a potential of like using it animated, using it within the layers of text? And I know I've gone back to that earlier in the conversation, but I actually really feel like that is something that was a real, like almost alchemical part of this design that came out, is the way that the sun animating, it's not even just that the text goes off and there's just the sun, you know, you're actually getting more sun on that fourth stage in the animation. And I feel like there's something about potential there. There's something about like, what can this give rise to? There's an invitation in that fourth stage. And like, that's in some ways, again, like, you know, where some of these things that, like Amir, the way you were talking about that with the Romanized Farsi, or the, you know, like the way that different things emerge out of like, out of something else, and the way this design actually like emerged out of this process where we worked back and forth, to me, that's actually where all the magic tends to happen. You know, like there's the inception when Amir and I started the conversation around the work, but there's a lot that you're not seeing in this. You know, the majority of the process you're not seeing in the result, and that's concealed. And again, like that's kind of the more poetic aspect of it.
I appreciate that so much, because I think that's actually really representative of the social movement that we're witnessing, you know. And I think going back to what Amir was saying at the beginning, and of the relatively low level of press coverage of this movement, you know, unless there are thousands of people in the streets every day, it's not going to get on CNN. Whereas a lot of the change that's happening in Iran and the calls for change that are happening in Iran are in more discrete moments. So in that sense, it's an interesting piece to convey the movement. But also, you know, the sun is literally the marker of time in Iran. We have a solar calendar, you know, so the sun is really, it really sets the pace for the months and the beginning of the year and the end of the year for Iranians. So the one question that I have for you guys, and I told, when we were preparing this, I told you I'm going to leave one question that I'm not going to tell you about. I'm going to introduce it during our session, because I know not only does Amir study Persian iconography, but so does Matt, and you both are scholars and students of the cultural heritage of this region. So did you think about the use of neon in Iranian pop culture and in Iranian street culture? Because obviously neon is very much a working class art form in Iran, in the bazaar, and some artists going back to the 50s and 60s started adapting neon sculpture into their artwork. So I'm wondering if you kind of tapped into the Iranian aesthetic of neon art making as you were making this.
Me personally, I didn't, but I mean, I really approached it more as a thinking about it in terms of advertising and signage and grabbing people's attention, which, you know, of course, it makes complete sense why they would use it in bazaars and, you know, in any kind of commercial setting. But that's really kind of the direction that I came to it. I don't know, Matt. I don't know. Were you aware of that? It seems...
I wish I could say that I consciously did in this case, but you know, to be totally honest, sometimes, you know, to be totally honest, in short, no. But what Shiva, I think, is really interesting in your question is like getting back like more to the seed or the root. like, why is neon in that role in Iranian culture, or why does it have these associations? Or why, even in the West, is it this medium that's used to sell religion and alcohol and sex? Like, so there's this, uh, quite frankly, I see it as it's a very, light is extremely mysterious. It's extremely mysterious, and it actually has this like potent appeal to those of us that are humans and are gifted with the power of sight. Um, and it has, whatever your worldview, it has like mystical connotations. It has relationships to so many origin stories and mythologies. And I think one of the things that came up for me when we were working on it, and when Amir approached us about it, is there's a local writer here in my area named Sophie Strand, who's been writing about mythology, but she speaks about how her question every morning when she wakes up is, who can I speak for today? Like, whose voice can I amplify? What message can I be a part of, like increasing its volume or understanding? And I think there is this poetry to neon, like it does that. It's an invitation into that. And its relationship to pop culture, I feel like, is often related to like, how do we take what we want to amplify? How do we want to take like what message we want to enlarge or convey? But there wasn't, on my part, a conscious like scholarly investigation into how it was relating to that.
I mean, it's not terribly scholarly, but it's interesting that as you kind of unearth the history of neon as an art form, we also get something that's very relevant for Amir, right? So LA being the first neon that you guys were talking about, and then also that, in Iran, it's in many Middle Eastern capitals, neon as a very highly cultivated street art form for commercial purposes has also seeped into, the work of some artists who want to kind of make art that speaks to the masses and has kind of pop culture sensibility. So, sometimes the unintended influences in our artwork are just as interesting to think about as the intentional pieces. So, and that's what I really love about this piece and the collaboration of the two of you bringing this together. So I want to just wrap up with one more question from me, and then we have some questions from the audience that we might want to tap into also. So my question is next steps. Amir, you told us that you made this artwork because you wanted to help amplify the message of the protest movement in Iran, and you wanted to try to kind of invigorate press coverage. But you also had another reason, a fundraising reason. Do you want to talk about that a little?
Sure. So yeah, something we left out kind of when talking about the inception of this was, since I knew I wanted this piece to be quite large. Neon is an expensive material. Just to install it costs thousands of dollars. There's a crane involved, and just the shipping. It's a very expensive production, and I knew that I couldn't self-fund it. So when I decided to do this, I started a GoFundMe campaign to raise funds for the piece, and for multiple reasons. One was to just raise enough money to make this large enough that I would be attention grabbing, but also I wanted to use the GoFundMe account as a way to also spread the message of what's happening in Iran and have people shared with their friends and have it go outside of just Iranian circles and hopefully reach a lot of Americans and Europeans and others who maybe don't know an Iranian person or aren't keeping tabs on the situation in Iran. So we did a fundraiser, and even with a lot of challenges of getting shadow banned on Facebook and on Instagram, we were able to raise the funds fairly quickly in about a week and a half. And something that was interesting was that I actually personally reached out to over 2,000 people on social media because my posts weren't being seen. And once we hit our goal of $36,000, which is what it costs to make this and install it and ship it and all that, something bizarre happened where we started getting more donations past our goal. And so now we're actually, we almost have enough to create a second one in hopes of installing it in New York City and New York or somewhere on the East Coast. But another idea around the fundraising, and also why I chose to do an artwork and not just like buy billboard space or advertising space, was that if we rented a billboard space for a few months, we'd be giving some corporation the money. So Clear Channel or, you know, whoever would be getting the money, and the donors' hard-earned money would kind of just go to this company. The ad would come down and that would be it. But I thought it might be more interesting to create an artwork and have the piece, you know, be this neon artwork, because then we could potentially sell the piece to a museum or to a collector. And I decided to, if and when we sell the piece, 100% of all the funds from the sale would be split evenly amongst 3 charities. So the Omid Foundation, Amnesty International, and the Center for Human Rights in Iran. And that was a much better plan, because with the neon, we can have it up as long as we want. Then we can sell it. And then all the money that was donated can then have a second life, and it can go and do further good.
That was part of your crowdfunding call, right? That you were going to sell the work and donate the work to these human rights organizations. So that's a whole nother angle to this. So we have a few questions from the audience. One person wants to know, you know, this work is very large and will probably sell for a significant amount of money. Are you planning on perhaps making smaller iterations of this that can be used for collectors?
The question is maybe. Honestly, I haven't thought that far ahead. My main concern right now is to find a collector to, or an institution to place the work in. I mean, ideally, what I would love is for someone to collect this piece and then put it in public display for even longer, because that would be the ideal situation. Because although women life freedom is attached to Iran, I think there's a universality to the message that I think most people can kind of gather around, and especially what's happening, you know, politically.
And Amy
in
wanted
America.
us to clarify that you're going to not donate the piece, but donate the proceeds from selling the piece to these organizations.
Yeah, we want to use the piece as a way to raise money for charities and do more good.
The design would make a nice print, you know, if you want to.
Yeah, there's been some discussions of that or other kind of merch, but now that we almost have enough money to make a second piece, we're trying to find a good location in New York to fabricate a second piece, and that piece would also be sold and then donated the money. So,
can you give us a sense of the scale of the piece? That's one of the questions from the audience.
Yeah, it's roughly 7.5 feet, or just a little shy of 7.5 feet in diameter. So it's quite large. Yeah. Yeah, it's large enough that a crane truck and a scissor lift has to be used to install it on the building.
Wow, that's quite something. Matt, when we were, do you want to let us know when it's going to go up in LA?
Yeah, the plan is this week. So
this week it's going to go up. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask Amy Landau, the curator of Amir's exhibition, to join us on camera if she's Hi, Amy. Thank you for joining us. I'm usurping my role as a moderator to ask the curator to join us because I really want to ask her a question. She and I have been talking over the past months since she reached out to me to let me know she was going to be curating Amir at the Fowler. And Amir, is this your first solo museum exhibition in California? You're on mute.
Excuse me. Yeah, it's the first solo show in California and Los Angeles.
That's very special. So Amy, my question to you is this, having spent so much time doing research and doing studio visits with Amir and really thinking about his larger body of work, and I know that you read a lot of text written about him, you're a very scholarly curator. So my question to you is, how do you think that this piece fits in with his larger body of work?
I have to say that a lot of the work has been just speaking with Amir. So I thank Amir for being a great collaborator. In terms of how this work fits into his overall production, I think about three different aspects, and I'm going to present them, but also ask Matt and Amir to riff off of me. So one, in terms of the technical aspects, I see Amir's work particularly moving from oil to acrylic, thinking about light and luminosity. And like, while his colors are saturated, there is this like desire to create a luminosity and an animacy, which he shows through skin color. So like, one, I'm thinking about his collaboration with David Judson for stained glass, and two, this collaboration with Matt for the neon. And then another way I see this plugging into his overall production is his ethical approach to using his artistic practice. And I looked at the question in the chat about, do you consider yourself a political artist, Amir? And he said, no, I think of myself as someone engaged with issues of the world in which we live. And I see that throughout Amir's works, like, just as a very humane person interested in what's going on the ground. And you see that in the narratives that he presents in painting, in sculpture, and in his stained glass. So that's another issue. And then thirdly, it's like, very infrequently do we find an artist who so fluidly like embraces collaboration. And I think that's attributable to Amir's curiosity about like, how does his way of working, how can it translate into different techniques, different ways of working? And like, through that interaction, he forms these wonderful collaborations with Matt and also David Judson, for example. And we see that in the exhibition. I think the Fowler exhibition is one of the first exhibitions to highlight Amir's creation of Beautiful Decay, which essentially just created a platform for artists across media to have a conversation. So I'll leave it at that, and just say, you know, we're coming to the end of our time right now, that I encourage the audience to come see the exhibition Fallacy of Borders at the Fowler Museum, and also to see the exhibition War on War, War on Wars, at the Shulamit Nazarian Gallery, where the
How long is the show at the Fowler up, Amy?
It's up until May 14th. And Amir, how long is War on Wars?
That's a good question. I want to say April 25th, but no, that must be wrong. Give me 1 second, I'll tell you. Let's see. It goes to March 25th. So it opens this Friday from 5 to 8 p.m. and runs till March 25th.
And Amy, you have some really nice public programs going on at UCLA. around the Persian Diaspora Conference that the Center for Near East is having, and also the infamous Farhang Foundation Nowruz Festival that happens at UCLA every year. So people can come to UCLA for these other projects and then also come by the Fowler and see Amir's art on view, right?
Well, we have the conference for the Iranian diaspora coming up this week, and we have public programs on Thursday, as well as for the rest of the months that the exhibition will be on view. So looking forward to that.
That's one of the things that's really nice about the Fowler is because it is a university museum, you all put together really wonderful public programming that can engage the community in the art that's on view. I really appreciated this opportunity to speak with all of you all. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Amir. Thank you, Libby, for being behind the scenes and handling this webinar so beautifully. And thank you so much, Amy, for organizing this exhibition and giving us all an opportunity to get together to talk about Amir and Matt and their creative collaboration on CHANT.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. Thank you, Shiva, Amy, Matt. Thank you.
Thank you very much and have a good night. And again, thank you to the Farhang Foundation and the Center for Near Eastern Studies at UCLA for their support of this program. Have a good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.